The horse sank into the muddy culvert, its dark eyes pleading for salvation. Richard Miller floored the accelerator. He didn't have time for this. But when the headlight beam illuminated the crescent moon scar on the animal's forehead, he slammed on the brakes. It was impossible, that mark. He knew it from somewhere he preferred to forget. Before we begin this story of redemption that will tug at your heartstrings, tell me where you're watching from and get comfortable. Please click like if you believe it's never too late for a second chance. Ready? Then let's discover together what Richard is about to face. Richard Miller signed the last document as the woman's tear dripped onto the paper. He didn't look up. 48 hours. Mrs. Jenkins, after that the house comes down. Please, Mr. Miller, my mother died in that house. My son took his first steps in this room. I just need one more month to... Sentiments don't pay mortgages. Richard closed the folder and called security. Escort Mrs. Jenkins out. As the woman left, sobbing through the marble corridors of Miller Holdings, Richard adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt. 40 years, building a real estate empire left no room for weakness. Compassion was a luxury the poor afforded themselves. The rich did what needed to be done. His penthouse apartment reflected this philosophy. Clean lines, neutral colors, no personal photos. The only decorations were business trophies and a panoramic view of the city he had helped rebuild, demolishing the old, erecting the profitable. The phone rang. His assistant, Sarah. Mr. Miller, your brother called again. He said it's about... Block the number. Richard hung up without letting her finish. He had blocked his brother's number 15 years ago, right after their father's funeral. Some matters were best left in the past, along with people who insisted on living on memories. In his study, a single drawer remained always locked. Inside, a rusty equestrian medal and a face-down photograph. Richard never opened that drawer, never needed to. The past was a dead-end investment. At dinner, Atlantic salmon prepared by his housekeeper and consumed alone, Richard reviewed his plans for the week. 3 families would be evicted to make way for the new shopping center. A century-old orphanage would be demolished for a parking lot. Business was business. His phone vibrated, a message from his lawyer. Documents for the Oakhaven County Ranch ready for signature. Need to go personally. County clerk's office closes tomorrow at 5 p.m. Richard sighed. The Oakhaven County Ranch was the last asset he had inherited from his father. 200 acres of unproductive land that he would finally sell to a mining company. He hadn't set foot on that land since the burial. He didn't intend to do any sentimental tourism now. But money was money. $15 million didn't grow on trees. The next day, driving down the dirt road in his Porsche, Richard checked emails while mentally calculating the profits from the sale. The mining company would extract copper there. The sooner they started digging, the better. Nature didn't pay taxes. It was then he saw the orange cones blocking the main road. An abandoned county road department project had caved in, forming a gigantic hole in the asphalt. The detour forced cars to take a narrow trail that bordered the old ranch. Richard snorted. County bureaucracy. In his projects, this never happened, because he supervised every penny invested, every procedure followed. Total control was the only way to avoid unpleasant surprises. The trail wound through abandoned pastures and broken fences. Richard accelerated, impatient to finish this business and return to civilization. He had dinner with Japanese investors at 8. Time was money. That's when he heard the whinny. First, he ignored it. Horses made noise, it was their nature, but the sound repeated, louder, more desperate. It came from a drainage culvert near the road, where rainwater had accumulated mud and construction debris. Richard slowed down for a second, just out of curiosity. In the rearview mirror, he saw the silhouette of a large animal struggling in the darkness of the culvert. He floored the accelerator. It wasn't his problem, but the image stuck in his mind like a splinter, dark eyes reflecting terror, muscles tense against the mud that seemed to pull the animal down. And something else, something in the way the horse's head turned towards him, as if it recognized him, as if it was specifically asking him for help. Richard shook his head. Imagination. Work stress. Horses didn't recognize anyone. They were just useful or useless animals, like everything else in life. But when he reached the first traffic light in town, he stopped the car. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. That damned whinny still echoed in his ears. Richard signed the ranch papers in 15 minutes. Deal closed, land sold, past officially buried. He tucked the $15 million check into the inner pocket of his jacket and left the county clerk's office with the familiar feeling of a job well done. But on the way back to Charlotte, instead of taking the main highway, he took the same detour from the morning, just to check if they cleaned the road. He lied to himself. The culvert was still there, and so was the horse. The situation had worsened. The mud had risen to the animal's chest, and its movements were weaker, more desperate. In a few hours, it would be too late. Richard stopped the Porsche about 20 yards away, leaving the engine running. He watched for a few minutes, calculating. An Arabian thoroughbred like that was easily worth $100,000. If it were found dead on land that was technically still his for a few more hours, there could be legal complications. A negligence lawsuit, negative headlines, nervous investors. It wasn't kindness, it was risk management. He got out of the car reluctantly and walked to the edge of the culvert. The horse watched him without moving, its panting breath creating small clouds of vapor in the cold afternoon air. There was something disturbingly intelligent in those eyes, a consciousness Richard preferred not to acknowledge. "Damn it," he muttered, looking at his $3,000 suit. The animal was trapped at least 6 feet deep, surrounded by twisted rebar and concrete blocks that had collapsed from the poorly executed construction. Richard returned to the car and grabbed the tow rope he kept in the trunk for emergencies. He looked at the horse again, then at his own reflection in the Porsche's window. Perfectly styled grey hair, a fresh morning shave, Italian shoes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "This is ridiculous," he said aloud. But he climbed into the culvert anyway. The mud was sticky and foul-smelling, mixed with machine oil and concrete debris. Richard sank up to his knees, feeling the icy dampness penetrate the expensive fabric of his pants. The horse didn't move as he approached, or couldn't move anymore. "Easy there, pal. I won't hurt you." The words came out naturally, surprising him. It had been decades since he'd spoken to an animal. He looped the rope around the horse's chest, being careful not to pull too tight. The animal watched him with a strange calm, as if it knew this man was its only chance. There was something familiar in those eyes, something that pricked at a memory Richard kept buried. The crescent moon scar on the horse's forehead gleamed wet under the fading light. Where had he seen a mark like that before? It took 2 hours to free the animal. 2 hours destroying $1,000 shoes in the mud, cutting his hands on the rebar, using the Porsche's winch to slowly hoist the horse out of the hole. When he finally succeeded, he was covered in mud from head to toe, sweating and exhausted. The horse stood beside the road, trembling slightly but on its feet. It looked at Richard with an expression that didn't seem like gratitude. It seemed like recognition. "There, you're free." Richard wiped his hands on his already ruined shirt. "Now get out of here before another hole appears." But when he walked towards his car, the horse followed him. It stopped when Richard stopped, walked when Richard walked. "Hey, stop that, I'm not your owner." Richard waved his hands to shoo the animal away. "Go on!" The horse didn't move. It just watched him with those dark, intelligent eyes, breathing vapor into the cold air, as if waiting for something, as if it knew something Richard didn't, or didn't want to remember. When Richard finally managed to get into the car and accelerate, he saw in the rearview mirror that the horse remained standing on the road, watching him leave. And for some inexplicable reason, That bothered him more than it should have. Much more. Richard arrived home at 10 that night with ruined clothes and a terrible mood. He had cancelled dinner with the Japanese investors, inventing a medical emergency. He couldn't show up covered in mud at a 5-star restaurant. In the shower, he tried to forget the horse's eyes. It was just an animal. Animals didn't have memories, didn't make emotional connections, didn't recognize people after decades. Rational thought, business logic, but the next morning he called Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson, Richard Miller, I need you to take a look at a horse. Of course, Mr. Miller, where is the animal? Richard paused. Good question. On the road to Oakhaven County near the... Actually, I don't know if he's still there. What do you mean you don't know? Isn't it your horse? It's complicated. Just go there and call me, okay? If he's on the road, examine him. I'll pay for the consultation. The vet arrived at the location 2 hours later and called immediately. Mr. Miller, the horse is here but not on the road. He's in the pasture of the old Miller Ranch. Do you know the place? Richard's stomach tightened. How did he get in there? The fence has been broken for years, but it's strange. He seems to know the place. He's standing right in the center of the main pasture as if it were his home. Richard hung up the phone and stood in the middle of his office for 5 full minutes. The Miller Ranch, his father's ranch, the ranch he had just sold and that would be demolished in a few weeks to make way for mining. When he arrived at the location, he found Dr. Peterson examining the horse under a century-old tree Richard remembered from childhood. The animal seemed calm, unlike the desperation of the previous day, almost at home. He's a male, approximately 15 years old, the vet reported. An Arabian thoroughbred, very well cared for until recently. He has this old scar on his forehead, but it's superficial. The interesting thing is that he has no brand, which is rare, but he has this. Dr. Peterson showed a small identification tag hanging on a discreet chain around the horse's neck. Richard hadn't noticed it in the darkness of the culvert. The tag was engraved with a name, New Moon Eclipse, 2009. Richard felt something cold run down his spine. New Moon Eclipse, that name. Why did it sound familiar? Do you know the horse? The vet asked. No, never seen him in my life. The words came out too quickly, too defensively. Strange, because when I mentioned your name on the phone, he perked up his ears. And now, look how he watches you. It was true. The horse didn't take its eyes off Richard, but it wasn't just curiosity. It was the gaze of someone who recognizes someone important, someone they hadn't seen in a long time. How much would it cost for me to take temporary responsibility for him? The words came out without Richard planning them. Just until we find the owner. Dr. Peterson smiled. About $500 a month, including feed and basic care. But Mr. Miller, you don't even have facilities for... I'll arrange it. Richard was already calculating. He could convert part of the ranch's barn into a temporary stable. The mining company wouldn't start excavations for 6 weeks. I just don't want people saying I abandoned an injured animal on my land. Another lie. Richard was getting good at it. That night, alone in his apartment, Richard did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He opened the locked drawer. He picked up the photo that had remained face down since his father's funeral. In the faded image, a grizzled man smiled beside a black horse. The man was his father at 50. The horse was young, with a small crescent moon-shaped scar on its forehead. Below the photo, in handwriting Richard would recognize anywhere, his father had written, "Eclipse and I, 1995 tournament champions, the best years." Richard's hands trembled holding the photo. New Moon Eclipse. 15 years older, but it was the same horse, his father's horse, the horse his father loved more than anything. The horse Richard had abandoned along with everything else when he decided the past was useless. Now, 15 years later, Eclipse had returned. He was on the ranch that would be destroyed, waiting for someone who would never come back, waiting for someone who died believing his son would one day return home. On Monday, Richard fired only 2 employees instead of the 5 planned. He gave 3 times the legally required severance to the housekeeper who had been with the company for 20 years. He approved a home loan for a junior employee who normally wouldn't even pass the committee. "Are you all right, sir?" asked Sarah, his assistant of 8 years. "You seem different." "I'm great. Just re-evaluating some company policies." Richard returned to typing on the computer, but the words blurred on the screen. His mind was in a pasture in Oakhaven County, watching a horse that should have been dead for years. During lunch, he drove to the ranch. He told himself it was to check the preparations for the mining company, but he knew it was a lie. He wanted to see Eclipse again. The horse was exactly where he had left him, grazing under the century-old tree. When he heard the car, he raised his head and walked directly to the fence, as if he had been waiting. "Hi," Richard said, feeling foolish for talking to an animal. Eclipse whinnied softly and extended his muzzle. Hesitantly, Richard reached out his hand. The horse sniffed it calmly, then rested its muzzle in his palm. The skin was soft, warm. "You remember him, don't you?" Richard murmured. "You remember the old man." For 15 minutes they stood there, man and horse observing each other through the broken fence. Richard noticed details he had missed on the day of the rescue. The proud posture, typical of competition horses, the small scars on its legs, marks from years of jumping obstacles, the way Eclipse moved his head, elegant and aware of his own beauty. His father always said Eclipse wasn't just a horse, he was an athlete, a partner, a friend. Richard always found that talk too sappy to take seriously. Now, looking into Eclipse's intelligent eyes, he began to understand. On the way back to Charlotte, he stopped at a farm supply store. He bought hay, special horse feed, some buckets, and a grooming brush. The salesman asked if he had experience with horses. "My father did," Richard replied. "I guess it runs in the family." It was the first time he had mentioned his father to a stranger since the funeral. That night, he called Dr. Peterson. "About Eclipse. Do you know his story? Where has he been all these years?" "I managed to get some information through his registration. After his original owner died, he changed hands 3 times. The last one sold him to a stable in Riverbend, but the place went bankrupt last year. The horses were scattered. Scattered how? Some sold, others abandoned. Eclipse probably escaped or was released when they couldn't sell him. 15-year-old horses don't have much commercial value." Richard felt a wave of anger wash over him. So he was alone, uncared for. For a few months, it seems. It's impressive that he survived. Thoroughbreds aren't made for living wild. After the call, Richard stood on his apartment balcony, looking at the lit-up city. Somewhere down there, families were having dinner together. Fathers were telling stories to their children. People were taking care of each other. He was 58 years old and had eaten dinner alone every night for 15 years. The next morning, he cancelled an important meeting and drove to Oakhaven County again. This time, he carried a brush and some feed cubes. Eclipse greeted him at the fence, but Richard noticed something different. The horse seemed thinner, its coat duller. 15.5 years of life, months living alone. He was aging, just like him. When he started brushing Eclipse's coat, the horse closed his eyes and relaxed completely. It had been a long time since anyone had cared for him that way. It had been a long time since anyone had cared for Richard either. "You know what?" he said softly, running the brush over the animal's neck. "I think we've both been lost for a while." Eclipse opened an eye and watched him, as if he understood perfectly. And maybe he did. The answer arrived on a Thursday through an unexpected phone call. "Richard, it's Jim Thompson from the neighboring ranch. I heard you have Eclipse around." Jim Thompson. Richard vaguely remembered the elderly neighbor, a friend of his father's since their youth. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. "Jim," his voice came out hoarser than he intended. "I heard what you're doing. The foundation, Eclipse." Jim approached slowly. "Your father would be so proud." "I don't know if he would be. I was too late for everything. He always said you'd come back. Always." Jim looked at Eclipse, who was watching the conversation with interest. "Remember when you gave Eclipse to him? You were 25, just got your first big bonus. You could have bought anything, but you chose something that would make the old man happy. And then I destroyed everything with stupid pride. You were young. You were angry. It happens." Jim hesitated, then continued. "I was angry at you too, for abandoning him, for not going to the funeral, but looking at all this here." He gestured to the foundation, to Eclipse, to the simple life Richard had built. "I think you found a way to come home." The brothers stood in silence for a few minutes, watching Eclipse graze. The horse had visibly aged but seemed at peace, as if he had finally found what he had been looking for all those years. "Paul," Richard said finally, "do you think there's room for one more person in the family? Even after all this time?" Paul smiled, the same smile Richard remembered from childhood before everything fell apart. "There always was room, Richard. You just didn't want to take it." That night, for the first time in 15 years, Richard didn't eat dinner alone. And Eclipse, watching from the window, seemed to approve. A year and a half after reuniting with Eclipse, Richard was in his simple home preparing breakfast when the phone rang. It was Dr. Peterson, and his tone of voice already said everything. "Richard, you need to come. Eclipse. He's not doing well." Richard found the horse lying under the century-old tree, breathing laboriously. Eclipse raised his head when he saw him approach, but the movement was slow, costly. "His heart is failing," Dr. Peterson explained gently. "It's natural at his age, but it might be his last few weeks." Richard knelt beside Eclipse and stroked his neck. The coat was thinner, grayer, but his eyes held the same intelligence as always. "Hi, old friend. How are you?" Eclipse whinnied softly, a sound Richard had learned to interpret in recent months. It was the sound the horse made when he was content, when he knew he wasn't alone. In the weeks that followed, Richard spent every day in the pasture. He brought a chair and a small mobile office. He continued to manage the foundation, but he didn't want to leave Eclipse alone. It was during one of these mornings that he discovered the box. He was cleaning the old ranch barn when he found a wooden box hidden behind some rusty tools. Inside, dozens of dusty VHS tapes, all labeled with his father's familiar handwriting. Eclipse, January 1996, training. Eclipse, March 1998, competition. Eclipse, 15th birthday. And at the bottom of the box, a different tape. For Richard, when he comes home. Richard took the tape home with trembling hands. He hadn't had a VCR in years, but he managed to borrow one from his neighbor. When he pressed play, his father's voice filled the silent room. "Hi, Richard. If you're seeing this, it means you found our secret box." Joseph Miller appeared on screen, older than Richard remembered, sitting beside Eclipse on a golden afternoon. "I'm recording this in 2009, a year before. Well, before I pass on. Eclipse is with me, as always." The horse on screen was younger, stronger, but Richard immediately recognized the posture, the way he tilted his head. "I want you to know a few things, my son. First, I never stopped loving you. Not for a second, even when you said terrible things, even when you stopped calling me. A father doesn't stop loving his son, just as eclipse never stopped waiting for you to come back. The camera focused on the horse, who seemed to be consciously posing. Second, you were right about some things. I was bad with money, too much of a dreamer. The ranch really was a bad investment. But you know what I discovered? Some things don't need to make a profit to be worth it. Like caring for a horse you gave me, like writing letters to a son who doesn't respond, like believing that one day you'll remember that family is more important than money. Joseph Miller stood up and walked to Eclipse, stroking the animal's neck. Third, Eclipse isn't just a horse. He's a symbol of the person you were at 25, when you thought about what would make me happy before thinking about yourself. That person still exists inside you, Richard. You just need to remember how to find him. The camera trembled slightly. His father's hands were no longer steady. If you're watching this, it probably means you've already lost a lot of money trying to care for Eclipse. It means you've made difficult choices, that people have called you crazy. I'm proud of that. I'm proud to have a son who was capable of putting love above profit. Joseph Miller looked directly at the camera, and Richard felt as if his father was in the room with him. Last thing, when Eclipse passes, and he will pass because that's the law of life, don't be sad for too long. Be grateful. Grateful that he taught you again how to love without expecting anything in return. That's the most important lesson I can leave you. The tape ended with Joseph Miller and Eclipse walking together towards the sunset, two silhouettes against the golden light. Richard watched the video 3 times before he could move. When he finally went to the pasture, he found Eclipse lying down, but alert. The horse watched him approach with those wise eyes, as if it knew something had changed. You knew, didn't you? Richard sat on the grass beside Eclipse. You knew I'd find the video. Dad taught you that too. Eclipse rested his muzzle on Richard's hand, a gesture that had become a ritual between them. He was right about one thing, Richard continued, his voice choked. You taught me again how to love. I don't know how to thank you for that. Eclipse whinnied softly, the familiar sound of approval. It was his way of saying he didn't need thanks. Love never did. Eclipse died on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Richard found the video. It was peaceful. He simply closed his eyes under the century-old tree where he had spent his last years and didn't open them again. Richard was there when it happened. He held the horse's head, whispered words of gratitude and love. And when Eclipse took his last breath, he felt something unexpected. Not just sadness, but a profound sense of completeness. The funeral was small, but meaningful. Paul came with his family. Dr. Peterson was present. Some neighbors showed up. Eclipse had become a small local legend, the horse that brought the prodigal son home. They buried him under the tree with a simple headstone. New Moon Eclipse, 1994-2026, loved by 2 good men. 6 months later, Richard was in the foundation office when a young woman entered, nervous. Mr. Miller, my name is Carla. My grandmother is Mrs. Jenkins, the lady you helped. Richard remembered immediately. Mrs. Jenkins, that first woman he had evicted and then helped through the foundation. She said you might be able to help me. My son. He's 8 years old and very sick. We need to move to Charlotte for treatment, but we can't afford to rent anything near the hospital. Richard listened to the full story. A child with leukemia, a single mother, a grandmother who cleaned houses to support the family. It was exactly the kind of situation the foundation had been created to solve. But something in the urgency of that mother touched Richard in a special way. I'll see what I can do, he said. In fact, I think I have an immediate solution. A week later, Richard was helping Carla and her son move into his old penthouse apartment. He had bought the property back specifically for this, to transform it into a temporary residence for families undergoing medical treatment. Mr. Miller, this is too much, Carla protested, looking at the panoramic view. We can't accept. You can. It's temporary, just until your son gets well, and when you leave, other families will use it. The boy, Gabriel, was exploring the apartment when he stopped in front of the only decoration Richard had kept. The photo of Joseph Miller with Eclipse, now framed on the main wall. Who are they? My father and his horse, they taught me some important things. What kind of things? Richard knelt to be at the boy's height. That it's never too late to do what's right. That loving someone is worth more than having a lot of money. And that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. Gabriel nodded with the seriousness that sick children develop early. My mom always says good people exist, but they're hard to find. Your mom is right, but you know what I discovered? We can choose to be one of those people. 2 years later, Richard was preparing a speech for the inauguration of the foundation's 10th house when the phone rang. It was Gabriel, now 10 years old and completely cured. Mr. Richard, I wanted to tell you something. When I grow up, I'm going to be just like you. What do you mean, Gabriel? I'm going to help sick kids. My mom said you saved our family. So when I'm big, I'm going to save other families too. Richard smiled, remembering his father's words in the video. Love always returns multiplied. That afternoon, he drove to the ranch where Eclipse was buried. He did this every week, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. He sat on the grass beside the headstone and told his old friend about Gabriel, about the foundation, about the 150 families who had already been helped. You know what's funny, Eclipse? He said, watching the sunset. For 50 years, I thought success was having more. More money, more power, more things. But what you and Dad taught me is that true success is being more kind, more present, more human. The wind rustled the leaves of the century-old tree, creating dancing shadows over the headstone. I can't go back in time and be the son I should have been. I can't bring Dad back to properly apologize, but I can be different today and tomorrow and every day I have left. Richard stood up, brushed the grass from his pants, and placed fresh flowers on the headstone. Before leaving, he whispered the last words. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for teaching me that second chances are possible, even when we think it's too late. As he drove back home, a simple house, with neighbors he knew by name and a purpose that made him wake up with resolve every day, Richard thought of something he had never considered before. He was happy, truly happy. At 60 years old, without the fortune he had accumulated, without the power he had pursued, without the admiration he had sought, but with something infinitely more valuable, the certainty that his life mattered, and that he still had time to make a difference. This story is about regret, about the words we didn't say, the visits we postponed, the people we left behind while chasing things that don't matter. If you have someone you love but are distant from out of pride, out of anger, out of being too busy, don't wait to need a horse to teach you what truly matters. Call, write, show up. Because unlike Richard, you still have time. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you believe in second chances, share it. We never know who needs to hear this today. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next story.